Hello everyone. Today I plan on covering an alternative strategy for performing Songless Remains Escape in Majora's Mask. Songless Remains Escape is a variant of Remains Escape, which is a collection of techniques that allow you to pick up the remains from a blue warp in Majora's Mask's 4 main dungeons without having to use song storage, which is an older technique that I'm not covering today, and without having to watch the Giants cutscene. It's called Remains Escape because you escape the blue warp, and then die or void out afterwards. Alright, so, first, let's cover the technique that you'll be using in order to perform Remains Escape, which is called grab storage. Alright. So grab storage, you might have encountered before when trying to do a super slide. This is a super slide. You push off of the bomb explosion as you try to pick it up. If you fail to pick up the item, if you fail to get a super slide, you'll get something called a grab storage, which gives you a ground jump. The important part is the grab storage part, because you can still pick up the item later. The game remembers that you were trying to pick up the item. Sorry. The game remembers you're trying to pick up the item, so when you let go of shield, you pick it up. Grab storage also applies in a super slide, so this has useful applications for a glitch called SRM, stale reference manipulation, which we are not covering in this tutorial. Alright. So the last part to cover is held actor. For the currently known setups of Remains Escape, we have to hold a specific actor, a specific item inside Link's hand as we're doing the setup. In this case, it would be the grab storage like setup, and that is the hook shot. There are other videos that go into why this works and how to do other similar setups, which I shall link in the video description below. But basically, Remains Escape does not work unless you are holding hookshot in your hand as you are doing the Remains Escape. One nice benefit about this is if you're holding hookshot and then you try to do grab storage, as shown before, but you let go of target, you'll automatically crouch. And that's useful because the other setups for Songless Remains Escape that involve the grab storage, they require you to time letting go of shield to pick up the blue warp, which is part of the actor pickup abuse that we're doing inside this glitch. So, being able to automatically still have the item stored as grabbed, while also not having to time letting go of shield, is very useful for learning how to do this trick unbuffered. It's not the fastest strat, but I find it to be easier than the fastest strat, so this is what I recommend. Again, it looks like this if you do it correctly. You try to pick up the bomb, but then Link has to put away the hook shot first, and because of that, animation gets overridden by the shielding animation. You never actually go pick up the bomb. Don't worry, this doesn't affect how the blue warp behaves. You still lift up the blue warp even if you don't try to lift up the bomb, as you see here. Let's start with the first dungeon. We're going to go in dungeon order for this tutorial. There are two small things to note before doing the strategy. In a no major glitches or all dungeons restricted context, you never want to do this on the first dungeon you beat. In the case of any percent NMG, that would be currently the Doa's dungeon, the Woodfall Temple. However, different routes, different categories have different first dungeons because you have to beat all 4 dungeons. The first dungeon you beat, that Giant's cutscene teaches you Oath to Order. And since the only way to get the song is either with text overflow or SRM, both of which are banned in a no major glitches context, if you do this on the first dungeon, you're locked out of the song and you can't beat the game under the rule set. So, never do this on the first dungeon. However, since different routes have different dungeons as their respective first dungeon, we are going to cover all 4 dungeons in this tutorial. And second, the blue warps are very tricky. It's very hard when you're starting out to tell where is the good place to stand in if you're gonna just YOLO the position. So, especially this blue warp over here, the one on the flower, because the flower screws with how you move around, since it's sloped and the behavior is different. So it's very easy to get sucked into the get item animation and get sucked into the blue warp, which you do not want. If you get sucked in the blue warp, then that means you failed the trick and you have to watch the entire Giant's cutscene. If you die, but you don't get the remains, that means you have to go through the entire dungeon again, beat the boss again, before you can try the trick again. So, it's usually safer to err on the side of getting stuck in the warp than dying without getting the item. But ideally, you want to be able to do both. So, it's very important to be aware of how you enter the blue warp, at what speed, what items you're holding in your hand, because holding an item in your hand, such as bomb or hookshot, can allow you to enter the warp a little bit deeper than if you just went barehanded, and what speeds, that way you know how to back out. Pause buffering if you're going to backflip out, because if you're too deep in and then you try letting go of the item that you're holding, then you'll end up getting sucked in automatically. And now, this is really why people don't like the flower. You have to YOLO each time. And we haven't got a good setup for the flower yet because nobody wants to bother dealing with it in the first place. If you look here, there I got sucked in. There, I ended up picking the bomb normally because I wasn't trying to do grab storage. There I overshot. There I did the trick correctly. Overshot again. Try picking up the bomb normally. got stuck in a super slide. This is the fancy one. You get stuck in a super slide. If you don't time the bomb correctly from here, which is very hard to do if you didn't practice, you still get sucked even though you're already outside of the warp. You escape, but you didn't. One more time doing it correctly. Let's see. Come on, I can do it. As you see, those remains are there. You die, and since you enter a dungeon from the start of the dungeon, you'll load back at the beginning of the dungeon when you die. If you just use KZ, the practice ROM, in order to load straight into the boss room, you'll reload the boss fight, but if you start the dungeon normally, you reload at the beginning of the dungeon. And that's intended behavior because you're dying. It's just that you got the remains without watching the cutscene. Alright, so now for the alternative not fully YOLO setup, what you want to do is line up with the middle of a blue warp. And then walk in holding the bomb and backflip out. You have to pause buffer the backflip, as I mentioned before, or else you'll get sucked into the blue warp. But if you can judge the spacing properly, it's much easier since you don't have to be as precise as on the flower. And let's demonstrate some examples of doing it correctly. Alright, I did not do it correctly. Let's line up with the middle of the blue warp again and try again. It's okay to die in the middle of the pickup animation as long as you don't let go of shield before Link starts crouching. If you let go of shield before Link starts crouching, you'll still get sucked into the blue warp. That's another thing to watch out for. And yes, you can still YOLO this as well. Just try to get Link's shield fully inside the warp by shimmying left and right. And if you're careful enough and don't overstep the boundaries, let's try again. If you get a good position, don't overstep your boundaries, then you should be able to do YOLO position on a flat surface as well. Like this. Alright, so now we're at the second dungeon. Snowhead Temple, Ghost Remains, and the YOLO setup and the walk-in setup with the bomb overhead are both the same as before. It's flat ground. Doesn't matter too much which of the spawn locations that the other bosses have because they always spawn on a flat ground. Unlike Dola, which has a chance to spawn on the flower. So the setups are basically the same. Very negligible difference in the warp distance. Let's demonstrate YOLO first. This should be good distance in. Okay, let's try again. And as you see, we got Ghost Remains. And I forgot to note this earlier, but you can change your equips to whatever you want while paused before the game over, before the death animation. And now, walking in with an explosive. Let's try again. Now, let's see Yord. And to prove a point that you can also avoid out validly and for this setup, I'm gonna equip Goron's Mask and then do the YOLO position as an example. Just get the shield all the way inside the warp without getting sucked out. That should be about right. You'll reload at the beginning of the dungeon, beginning of the boss fight again. But you'll have it in your inventory. This is useful for some other applications, but for the purpose of the tutorial, you don't need to worry about that. And for the case of dying, that also works. Same as usual. You can do your equips. Let's see if I can do equip swap. Oh well. You can do your equips during this time. And then die. And go back to the beginning of the dungeon. As usual, and thing about Georg is normally you beat her in the water. So if you swim to a corner as human and you're on critical health, as in less than full heart, ideally half a heart, you can roll straight to the warp if you roll from the corner that's close to the warp, and then you're very close to the warp. Just line up and then do the walk and setup. And it works the same as usual. Finally, we got the fourth dungeon, twin mode, to deal with. You want to line up with the cardinal direction using the camera behavior and use as position, then turn to the diagonal and line up with the line over here, one of these lines. If you're gonna do the walk-in setup, like so. And you can super slide or hex to the boundary of this dungeon and of this boss room and void out. And this void zone is special because it'll take you to the beginning of the dungeon. However, you can also just come in with low health, and then do the same trick and die off of the bomb as usual. And this is faster than super sliding all the way to the end and voiding out. And as you see, twin mold remains. And YOLO position also works. You want the shield fully in, and then do the same as usual. And that's pretty much it.
If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments or to come visit the Majora's Mask speedrunning Discord server. The links that I mentioned earlier will be in the description related to how Remains Escape works and different setups for it. Thank you once again everyone for watching the whole video and have a great day.